Welcome to Season 7 of my podcast, Between Us, Stories of Unconscious Bias. This season, I speak to people in Mexico, America, Ireland, Sri Lanka, India, and the UK. I have stories that I'm sure will resonate with anyone, anywhere in the world. For example, how to be more confident. Or how are we seen differently in the country of our birth, only because we don't look like everyone else? I also hear stories that are chilling, and I'm moved at how the speaker found the inner resilience to overcome their challenges. I hear stories of music, religion, and so much more. I hope you take away as much as I have when hearing these stories. Thank you so much for listening. Were you one of those kids who had a label as a child? Clumsy, perhaps, or fat, or stupid, or dark-skinned, or short? Did this label stick? Did you grow up into your adulthood thinking this label is what defined you? Or did you prove them wrong and create a whole new persona for yourself? This is Between Us, Stories of Unconscious Bias. I am Smita. I'd like to introduce Carlos Hidalgo. Carlos is a life design coach, a corporate culture development consultant, two-time author, TEDx speaker, and international keynote speaker. Over the span of the last 25 years, Carlos has held corporate roles, started his own entrepreneurial ventures, led his company to receive multiple Inc. 500 awards, and has served in non-profit organizations. But if that's not enough, Carlos is now dedicated to helping others design a life they love to live through his life design coaching and corporate culture services. Carlos's last book, The UnAmerican Dream, details his journey from a workaholic to a life that he loves. I wonder if that resonates with any of you. It certainly does with me, which is why I'm excited to speak to Carlos and hear his stories of unconscious bias. Thank you so very much for joining me, Carlos.
Smita, it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
So we're talking unconscious bias, and I'm already guessing you're going to have a lot of stories to share. But before we even hear the stories, what's your take? What's your understanding of these words, unconscious bias?
Yeah, the way I view it is unconscious bias are assumptions or beliefs that we have learned through our experience and as we age that honestly we're not even really aware we have until they bubble up. And it can be about things, it can be about places, it can be about people. And so that's how I understand and what I think of when I hear the words unconscious bias.
I love the example of bubbling up, and I can just see it as there kind of latent, and then suddenly it influences you in a way that you don't even realize. But then
Yes.
what does that look like for you, Carlos? I mean, I'd love to hear some stories that kind of tell us more about you.
Yeah, I think as I thought about this recording and our discussion and my own experience with unconscious bias, I think the biggest example I can bring is the unconscious bias I had about myself and my journey and what I believed about who I was, which then dramatically affected how I operated and trying to define my purpose. And so that's probably for me the biggest example I have is the lies and the false beliefs I thought about my own self.
I'm trying to think how to respond to that sentence of yours, Carlos, because that's a very powerful thing you just said. Because we all create our own reality to wake up in the morning and get on in the world that we live in whatever way we create a reality that works for us. We just do that instinctively, and that is our unconscious bias. But obviously, I mean, if you don't mind my asking, I wonder whether you could share a little more detail on what you've just said.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it went back to, and it's one of the reasons, one of the things we talk about the most in life design is getting back to who God created you to be. And for me, I just operated from a false sense of identity, probably, I want to say somewhere starting in the junior high age, 12, 13, 14. And it really was a result of me internalizing a lot of the conflicts that I had in my relationships with my dad, relationships with an older brother, and then reinforced by coaches and teachers who just kind of gave me this idea that I wasn't smart enough, I was lazy, the words I can't were going to follow me for the rest of my life. And so when you're that age, you really don't have the emotional intelligence to process that and go, well, that's not true about me. And so in my case, I internalized it, and that became kind of my identity, if you will, which then made my purpose all about proving them wrong. And when you go through life with a chip on your shoulder, it really impacts every single facet of your life.
There are just a few things here that I want to kind of highlight, for want of a better word, or pick up. Certainly the choice of word of identity and the fact that identity, it means so much, it means different things to different people.
Mhm.
And I would say that all of us have multiple identities, but this idea of how do I see myself? And so you're telling us that because of the people who most influenced you, the school and your family life, you had begun to believe that perhaps you were no good at anything, or you were not much good at most things. And then that second bit that you mentioned, the phrase that you used was chip on your shoulder. And I think that's a really big one to pick up and expand on a little bit, because the phrase that I often use when I talk about unconscious bias is the fact that all of us are metaphorically born with a backpack on our back.
Mm,
And we fill that with things, and then we carry it around with us
yes.
to protect us. So that chip is obviously, we all know what a chip on the shoulder means, but I'm visualizing it more in your back, and you're carrying it around with you and it's weighing you down because you haven't even realized how much it has taken over how you see yourself. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying is I didn't realize how that shaped me, how that formed me, the hurt that came with that. And so again, rather than kind of curl up into a ball, my personality is such of, okay, you don't think I can? Well, I'm just going to show you I can. And so throughout my teen years into college and even into adulthood, my entire drive was about just proving them wrong or trying to shake in a very improper way and very useless way the weight that was in my backpack rather than dealing with it and addressing those limiting beliefs head on and addressing that unconscious bias head on. I carried it around with me. And, you could say, well, I used it as motivation, but really
But
when you
did you though? Yeah.
well, no, and that's the thing. It became such a weight on me because I refused to deal really with the hurt and the pain that went with all of those things. And so instead of a motivation, it really became more of a toxicity in my life and kind of a prison that just fostered shame, which shame just tells you all the lies that reinforces the lies you already believe about yourself.
Yeah. And what you were saying just now is the fact that I'm just instinctively responding to what you're just saying, Carlos. And the fact that if we don't face up to the toxicity, that's the word you used, or if we don't face up to these ideas of what is making you feel upset or shameful. Let me rephrase that again. If we were to bury our heads in the sand, which guess what? We all do because life's so much easier and we think it'll go away. We do that, but then the outcome is that it actually makes us feel more ill in the long term because we haven't acknowledged who we are and what we're about. I think that's what I want to learn from you. Is that that's what you're saying?
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. And I encounter so many people who say, hey, I want to define my purpose, which is awesome. I think we should all look at the purpose or why we are here. But my stance continues to be is we can't accurately determine our purpose until we get back to the truest form of ourselves and that
Exactly.
core identity of who we are. And I will tell you the other thing that it's done is in me being able to work through that the restoration of relationship that that has fostered
Of course,
and the strength of
naturally,
relationship. So
naturally,
I
yeah.
think about my dad now, and we have a beautiful relationship. We're super close. And, again, that's another benefit of walking through some of those hard things that you have to undo and unlearn. And I think, there's a good portion of us that have to do that hard work in order for life to really open up.
But it's not easy though, Carlos, is it? I mean, it's extremely hard and it's an extremely brave thing to do because it's just so much easier if we can just pretend that it'll go away. But the power of actually going inward and thinking about your life story, was there a trigger? Was there something specific that happened that made you?
Are you asking if there was a trigger where I kind of realized that I had to undo this, or was
Yes, yeah,
there?
that's what I meant. Yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah. So the trigger was basically at the end of 2015, my life fell apart. I had been leading a very successful consultancy based out of Atlanta. We were, worked with brand name clients, and I had co-founded that consultancy in 2005. And as the agency grew, so did my ego. And again, that's that chip on the shoulder of I'm proving everyone wrong. And I made that the focal point of my life and the central point of my life. So I told my wife to take a back seat. I told my kids to take a back seat because I was hell bent on just being successful. And with that came some really poor choices. I stepped out of my marriage. I just became an egomaniac in the process. And at the end of 2015, it all fell apart. I hit rock bottom personally and professionally, and everything unraveled. And I was left with a choice of, is this really what I want? This is what success looks like? Or coming face to face with the persona that I had built and the facade of that persona and doing the hard work to get back to the truest form of myself.
We have to remind ourselves is that you had lived this false reality that, you know what, I'm going to prove you all wrong. And it was all about one's ego. Because if you're saying, I'm going to prove you wrong, that means I want to prove myself right. And therefore, it's my
Yes.
ego. And I've got one over you.
Yes.
And so, until that age, and forgive me for asking, so what age were you in 2015?
Let's see. I was 44 years old.
So, we're
I think I
talking
did the,
about, we're talking about an enormous many years. We're not talking about this epiphany at age 25. You get to age 44, 45 years old, and it's only because there has been an enormous crisis in your personal life that it forces you to stop and think. And the idea, really, of the phrase that you use, is this what success looks like? How do we even measure success? Or what do you say when we ask you that question, if anyone asks you that question, when you were 34 as opposed to when you are today? What's the difference?
yeah, for me at 34, it was about how high can I climb that corporate ladder? How big can I grow my company? How much money can I put in my bank account? And today I look at success and say, what is my relationship with those that I love the most, primarily with God, my wife, and my children? And then after that, my very close circle of friends. What does that relationship strength look like? Am I working every day to nourish those relationships? And am I giving as much to that relationship as I'm receiving? And if I can say that my relationships are in good standing, that I'm giving as much as I'm receiving, that I'm allowing myself to be known and I'm pursuing them to know them intimately, then to me, that's a successful life.
That's success, right? So it's the give and the take. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, because I mean, in every relationship, right, whether we want to or not, whether we're actively trying to receive, we do receive. I mean, I receive incredible benefit in the relationship with my wife, the way I feel loved, the way I feel secure in our marriage, the way I feel supported and encouraged. And so it's not necessarily anything that I, on a daily basis, verbally ask for, but I know I receive it and I'm thankful for it. And I want to be that same for her. I want her to feel supported, encouraged, loved, secure, safe, and all those things. So it is a give and take in that regard. And
It should be, exactly,
yeah,
exactly. And it's about not taking it for granted. I think that's what you're also saying. That's what I'm hearing.
absolutely. And for me, gratitude has been something that has really helped me with any kind of ego, because I don't believe gratitude and ego can exist in the same space.
I'm going to leave that sentence there for us to sort of think over on our own. But I'd love to hear another story because, I mean, can you share another story with us, Carlos?
Yeah, my mind goes back to my days before I started the consultancy. I worked at the software company McAfee for a number of years. And I got a call from my boss who said, "Hey, we're shuffling the deck a little bit and we've moved one individual into your team. I know you guys know each other, but I really like you to make the time to get to know him." So I flew out to California to meet my friend Tim. And at that point, again, just barely knew him. And we were at dinner. And Tim said to me, "Hey, I have a confession to make." And I was like, "Okay, what?" This is starting off strong. And he said, "I was really concerned when they told me I was going to be reporting to you." So I was curious about that. And I said, "Well, why?" He said, "Well, I know how much your faith means to you." He said, "And with me being in a gay relationship, I was really afraid about the response you would have to me as an individual." In one sense, I was so taken back by his honesty and also honored by his honesty that he would feel comfortable enough to have that conversation. But I was so surprised at the same time. And so I just said, "Well, yeah, it doesn't matter to me." And then, kind of joking around, I said to him, "Well, what should I have thought of you with you coming out here alone with me at dinner with you being a gay man?" And he kind of chuckled and he was like, "Okay, I get your point." But it really, from there, because he was so honest and so brave in sharing that unconscious bias that he had towards me, and actually at that point, quite conscious fear, it really opened up a great relationship. We had him over to our home for dinner. I got to meet his partner, Tony. I got to meet his kids. And he and I still stay in touch. We're not blowing up our phones, but we send emails back and forth every once in a while. He's now out in California with Tony. It's just really, I give him a lot of credit, because had he not shared that with me, I'm not sure we'd be where we are today. But his idea was, this guy's a man of faith. He's not going to like me.
And that's a great story because we're looking at this idea of faith and religion and what that means and how we, the world over, it doesn't matter what religion or what faith, but when people say, "Oh, I really believe in my religion, it matters to me, it's very much part of my life, and my faith is important to me," people have unconscious biases.
Yes.
That's what this gentleman was. I mean, unconscious bias was then went into a full blown conscious, "Oh my God, I'm petrified. I know what Carlos is going to think of me." But I mean, rather than my articulating that, what kind of unconscious biases do you think people have on this based on your experience or your understanding?
Oh, I think from a faith basis is, some of the questions I've literally been asked are, "So how do you guys have fun?" And which just makes me laugh. And I'm like, like I'm some kind
I'm sorry. I had to
yeah,
laugh out loud there. Yeah.
yeah, like I'm some kind of Puritan. Or the other one I get most often is, "Oh, so you're going to try to convince me that what you believe I should believe?" And so it's
Mm.
almost this defensive posture immediately. But I'm quite delighted when people say, "So tell me more about that. What does that look like?" Because I'm very quick to say I'm not a religious person. I'm a spiritual person and a relational person, and someone who really, my faith is the basis for my life. So it is interesting to see how different people respond to it and want to label it rather than just being okay exploring it.
I think it goes back to the earlier sentence you said, Carlos, which is about the fact that gratitude and ego don't go together. I was going to leave that there for us to think about on our own, but I'm bringing it back into the conversation because faith, you said I'm not a religious person, but I'm a spiritual person. And what does the word spiritual mean to you, then, is my question.
Yeah, for me, spirituality is really the foundational relationship I have with Jesus Christ. and the mystery of all of that. And I was actually talking to a friend the other day, and we were talking about our faith. And I said, at the end of the day, I don't want to worship someone or submit to someone that I can come to the end to. I'm okay with not fully comprehending or understanding divinity or God or Jesus. Because if I fully understood them, then they really wouldn't be worthy of my faith or my worship. And so to me, spirituality is that journeying to say, how can I be more Christ like? How can my faith grow? What am I learning? What is God trying to teach me? And so it's the exploration of all of that and how that impacts my life and just how I operate. Really, it's the core operating system that makes me function on a day to day basis.
And it's also, and I don't know why, but I was thinking, it's also about not intellectualizing it. You're
Yes.
just going with your emotions, your feelings, your instinct, your spirituality. You're not going to be intellectualizing it, because if you do, then that's a whole other angle. You're looking at it very differently.
Well, and then you have to question, what role would faith play? I don't need faith to say that 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Yeah,
That's more mathematical, intellectual. I need faith to say, I'm going to believe in something that I can't actually touch or see plainly. And so to me, that's a big element of it. If I just intellectualize and get too academic, well, then it's just book knowledge.
exactly. Yeah. Ah, I would really, really like another story if you've got one more that you might be able to share with us, Carlos, because
Yeah.
I'm loving this. I'm loving just hearing. There are so many aspects and different things that you've told us, and they all kind of whizzing in my brain as you speak. So thank you.
Absolutely. No, pleasure to share it. Yeah, the last one is really about me. A number of years ago, so my wife used to do quite a few nonprofit trips to Uganda. At that point, she was volunteering with a group in the poorest region of the country where they were working with single moms and widows on education and long-term sustainability. And so I had the privilege to join her on one of these trips. And despite her advice of go in with no expectation, which I think I did pretty well, I still had this idea that being a businessman, having done this for a long time, I would be able to go over there and really impact these women with some smart business entrepreneurial tips. Not that I was going to be in a classroom, but I was going to be engaging. And so I had heard that, they kind of have businesses and they learn how to read and write and arithmetic. And I thought, okay, that's great, but, I can bring some experience here. And I got to tell you, I walked away with the idea of I would hire any one of these women on the spot. And rather than trying to dispense my great wisdom, you can't see me, but I put that in quotation marks. I learned so much from them on determination, on drive, on vision, on just joy in the process that I was like, man, oh man, do I have a lot to learn. So it totally flipped the script on me.
Ah, I'm thinking of a couple of things here when you share that story. Firstly, this sense of hierarchical ego, right? We keep bringing ego back into our conversation.
Yes.
And the idea that I'm better than you because I've had these qualifications, I've had this formal education to teach me management skills and knowledge, and I've had so many years of experience. And there you are in a developing country, in a little village. And so you've got that assumption there. You may, and I forgive me for pushing the boat a little bit, have an assumption that maybe it's because you're a man and they're women. I don't know. I'm wondering, curious. But on both levels, you were really, really, those little assumptions you may have had were completely thrown out the window.
Oh, absolutely. And I can honestly say I didn't in any respect think, well, but they're women, therefore they need a man to kind of show them. I do remember actually in that first trip challenging a group of men to try to keep up with the women and the example that they were setting for them. But it was more, I think what I learned on that trip was there is a difference between education and intelligence. And I saw that in spades. These women always had the intelligence to do what they were doing, but they needed the training, they needed the education to learn how to apply that intelligence.
So when you say education, you weren't taking them to school and teaching them things. So what does that mean, education?
Yeah, this program that my wife volunteered with, this group, they would go into these villages and the villages would create co-ops of women and they would teach them basic domestic skills, hygiene skills, things we would take for granted. And at the same time, they would teach them arithmetic and they would teach them grammar, they would teach them writing. Because in that culture, hard to believe that we're still saying this in 2022, in that culture, women are truly second class citizens. And so many of these women were never educated past the primary school age. And some of them, left school at age 8. So they never had the opportunity to get a formal education. And so this program was designed to give that to them as adults. And so now they were given the tools and the enablement to say, I can take all this intelligence and all of this drive that I have, and now I have the tools to apply it and build these businesses. Some of these women sell in the market, some of these women have restaurants. I met one woman who made enough to build her own home and then took a series of microloans to expand her business. And I'm sitting there going, this woman's a kick-ass businesswoman. I want to hire her.
I love it.
I work for her.
Yeah, I love it. And what's also interesting, really, if you like the other message, which, you're telling us a story, but the message that I'm also taking away in this story is it goes back to your first story and this idea of self belief and this idea of who am I and what is my identity rather than do I just follow the identity that people have put upon me? So, in that remote village in Uganda, correctly, I've never been to Uganda, so I could be getting it wrong, but it could be that women are second class citizens. Women, as you already mentioned, do not complete school. They take care of the home, they take care of the husband, they take care of the kids. End of story. And that has always been my identity, is what they've said. And what has happened here with external support is they've started questioning themselves. And that's given them a different kind of self belief. I mean, that's what I'm getting this powerful stories telling me.
You're exactly right. Once these women realize that they are worthy and they are worth loving, to watch that knowledge and that fact and them embracing that truth transform their lives, it is nothing short of miraculous. When you watch a woman just giddy writing her name for the first time because she now knows how to write and spell. I mean, it's an amazing thing to behold. And I think, it's what all of us want to know. Are we worthy and are we worth loving? And the answer to every person who asks that question is yes.
The answer is yes. Are we worthy? And are we worth loving? Oh, that's just so powerful. But then, this unconscious bias thing is around us all the time, including maybe now as you and I are talking to each other, because my conscious bias is I'm so loving this conversation. I don't want to end it because I know that the listeners are going to take a lot away from it as I am. But how do you manage your unconscious biases? Because there may be new ones that you're not aware of that suddenly climb into your backpack without you realizing.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the human condition, unfortunately. For me, I always try to, and I say try because I'm not 100%, but I try to maintain a stance of curiosity versus judgment. And that's a Walt Whitman quote is be curious, not judgmental. And curiosity is kind of, I've never done a word for the year until last year. And so this year, my word for this year is curiosity is instead of looking at a situation or even a person to say, how could you do that? Or how could you say that? Or how could you operate that way? What I want to do is, what's the backstory behind that event? What's the backstory behind that person? What's the backstory behind that thing to make it either appear that way or make it operate that way? And if I can understand that, I can either relate to it and exhibit empathy or I can show compassion towards it. Doesn't mean that I will excuse it if it's bad behavior or unwarranted or unethical or illegal, but at least it gives me an understanding to go, now I get it. And I can look at it from a different perspective rather than just making some snap judgment and tucking it away in my subconscious and having it affect how I interact.
I love it. Curiosity. And you say that you have a word every year. Is that what you said? Or did
I
I
start
misunderstand you?
Yeah, no, I started that last year. It was just something that I seen people do it. I'm not a big journaler, but I was like, you know what? I kind of want a word that I can come back to and think upon and meditate. And so my word for this year is curiosity. I really just want to be curious about people. And I think it also drives us in relationships, right? We're complex beings. If I can be curious about my wife and my kids and my friends and really seek to get to know them better, it's only going to deepen that relationship.
Oh, brilliant. I love it. I could go on forever, but I'm going to pause there because I want us all to think about the word curiosity and what that means to all of us. Carlos Hidalgo, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so very much for sharing your stories of unconscious bias.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Proud to announce that my podcast series is now heard in 104 countries, ranging from Guadeloupe to Iceland, Argentina to Palestine, and even Morocco. It is ranked in the top 3% worldwide. This is clearly a series that connects with people all over the world, and you are one of them. I thank you for listening. I would also like to thank Jack Godfrey for his original music in the closing of each podcast interview. If you like this episode, please do share, rate, and review. I am Smita. Until next time.